This episode of the Chris Johnston Show is brought to you by Sports Interaction. Sports Interaction is your homegrown sports book where local takes on an entirely different meaning, focusing on the teams, games, and players that matter to you. Sports Interaction is on the ground, on top of all the local trends, and offering prop bets that you'd never even imagined existed, from same-game parlays to a best-in-class casino featuring thousands of games and live 24/7 dealers. And now introducing the Locker Room, the first of its kind in Canada, a live watch party for the biggest games of the week. Sports Interaction, your homegrown sportsbook. Go to sportsinteraction.com/SDPN to open an account. Bet local. 19 plus. Please play responsibly. And if you have questions or concerns about gambling or the gambling of someone close to you, please go to connexontario.ca.
I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear? Powered by Sports Interaction, your homegrown sportsbook. Always remember to bet local.
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
Big Money Siege on a Monday morning. Hopefully you're doing okay. I know the Cowboys took it on the chin, but we have a very packed show for you today. The NHL trade freeze is coming up. Ask CJ questions are coming up. Some updates on Zach Parise and Phil Kessel. I have to ask about Kyle Dubas, though. The Pittsburgh Penguins were back in Toronto. Kyle Dubas specifically back in Toronto a couple days ago. That game went down. It went bad for the Penguins. But I would love to know your thoughts and analysis on how that all went down.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's going to be any number of bad games that every team plays in a season, but you really probably don't want one in that case if you're Kyle Dubas coming back to Scotiabank Arena for the first time as a visiting general manager / team president in Pittsburgh. I mean, a 7-0 loss pretty much speaks for itself. The Leafs also hit, I think, 4 or 5 posts in the game. Like, it is the rare 7-0 game that honestly the score could have been worse, I think. Pittsburgh just was very leaky defensively, gave up a lot of odd man rushes and chances to the Leafs. And, Toronto was playing without Austin Matthews for that game and still had no trouble generating some great offensive chances. So you could see it. I was in the arena, actually in the press box, but obviously I was aware of the broadcast, and they kept panning to Kyle's booth, him and Jason Spezza there. Must not have been a great night for them. Few fans tried to sort of derisively chant Dubas. I don't think it never reached a big enough pitch to be all that notable, but there were a few people out there that recognized he was in the building. And I think Pittsburgh's an interesting team for me. I mean, they really, as we're talking now, we're almost at the Christmas break here. They're not in a playoff spot. They've had some injuries like a lot of teams, but you'd wonder where that push is going to come from. I don't have a terrible amount of confidence in the Eastern Conference right now. There's a lot of teams kind of hanging in that no man's land zone. And so, maybe that by virtue of that might keep a lot of those teams in a playoff race right into March and April. But, it feels like a kind of a crucial moment in time for Pittsburgh. And that was not a very good game for them on Saturday.
Right now, they're 5 points out of the last wildcard spot in the East. They do have a 500 record, but this is well below expectations for this team. The power play, we've hyped them up from preseason, but they are among the bottom third in the league in that regard. What does Kyle Dubas do with this roster going forward?
He gave a press conference, I believe it was last week in Pittsburgh, and there's sort of a cryptic line as part of that press conference about sort of like waiting till the All-Star break to sort of make any decisions. And I think, my understanding of where they're at is, Kyle Dubas has come into this team over the summer. Obviously a legacy team with some legacy players. You have Chris Letang, Evgeny Malkin, and Sidney Crosby have been teammates more than any other teammates in North American professional sports for the amount of time they've spent as teammates. And I think that the general manager wants to give his team a window here to dig out of it, to get back into a playoff position, to maybe show him that he should be looking to add at the deadline. But, I built into the unspoken part, I would say, of that line in Kyle's press conference last week is that if that doesn't happen, I think he's really going to have a decision to make when it comes to sort of retooling. And I don't see Pittsburgh as being eventually. We know a rebuild is coming. Like, that's no mystery. That's been on the horizon for some time. But I don't see it being the kind of rebuild where they take everything down to the wood. Like, in San Jose, they're kind of in the middle of a rebuilding process. They've traded away some really good players, some legacy players, Brent Burns, Carlson, and the like. I don't think Pittsburgh's going to go that route. I really believe they're going to kind of move everything around the chairs as much as they can, but I would be surprised if we're talking about Crosby, Malkin, or Letang being part of those moves. And so I think, you might look at some retooling there. They got an intriguing decision with Jake Gensel, who's been a really valuable goal scorer for them, has put up good points and all that this season, but he's a pending UFA. He's 30 years old, kind of in that middle zone where if you're a team like Pittsburgh and maybe, a rebuild's on the horizon, maybe he's best traded at the deadline. And so I think Pittsburgh will be a team that we really keep close eyes on as we get closer to March 8th, just in terms of where they're at in the standings, what that means for management. And, I think Kyle Dubas, it's probably easier in some ways being new to the organization to make some of those hard decisions. It's not time to decide anything just yet, but look, man, it's already, I can't believe it's already almost the holiday break. It won't be long before it's the end of January. And if they're still 5 or 6 or 7 or more points out of a playoff spot, I think they're going to have to look at pieces they can sell. As I say, no headlines here. I don't think that it'll be any of the main pieces that were part of those 3 Stanley Cup teams.
Which makes sense in one regard because they're still at a high level. But could you imagine? Just put yourself in Kyle Dubas' shoes for a second. Could you imagine being the guy that has to consider even trading Crosby or Letang or Malkin? I know you're saying that's not going to happen. It doesn't look like it will. But could you imagine being in those shoes?
I can't really, and I should be clear. I'm not saying it's not 100% going to happen. I just don't think it's likely to happen. It doesn't seem like that's the way the wind's blowing. But, sometimes things change too, right? I mean, a lot of it is about what those players want. I mean, certainly in the case of Malkin and Letang, they've got, contracts that stretch into the future here. Do they still want to play out those contracts, even if they're in a spot where maybe they start to feel the Penguins can't win a cup before they're likely to retire? Crosby is only 1 year out. He's got one more season beyond this one on the 12-year deal he signed, obviously 11 years ago. But it will be up to him. Does he want to sign a new deal? Everything I've heard is that he wants to be a career Penguin. But again, let's see how the season goes. I mean, those players have been on so many great teams, even the ones that didn't win a Stanley Cup. They've been used to being in the hunt every year. If it turns into the type of year where they're losing games, maybe not 7-0, but if it's one-sided and they're not really that competitive, I mean, look, it's a tough one. I don't think there's any nice way around this. Look at the players in this generation. I'm just going off the top of my head. Like you had Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane had long-term deals in Chicago. Obviously enjoyed lots of success there, but their last 5 or 6 seasons, I mean, Chicago was a non-factor when it came to having a chance to win a Stanley Cup. I mean, they barely made the playoffs. And obviously part of what's fueling Patrick Kane's comeback is he wants to be part of those kind of teams again. I mean, it's hard to say where these guys will be at after another, say, year of potentially not moving forward as an organization. But, I think for Kyle Dubas' standpoint, he just doesn't have any prospects really, right? I mean, they have Yager who's going to the World Juniors for Team Canada.
Brandon Yager, yes.
But really they don't have a lot of prospects in the pipeline. They've already traded away a future first-round pick as part of that Carlson deal. I think they don't even own all their seconds coming up. I mean, I think it's going to be his job at some point in time to start recouping future assets and stockpiling and doing it that way. I think that they're going to have flexibility on the cap. One way they might look to get better is going out and signing players in free agency or making trades for impactful players that are maybe, say, 25, 26, 27, and trying to keep it going that way. I think there's lots of ways to approach a rebuild. It's not always just trade away absolutely anything with value and start fresh. I think that there's different sort of modes of it, and I think that the Penguins will probably eventually get to a more modified version of that kind of thing. But certainly the more 7-0 games you see, that conversation I think is going to get pick up some speed here a little bit because Crosby's played out of his mind this year. Honestly, if you look at it, as I said, Gensel's had a pretty strong start to the year, but there's just defensively, I mean, that team gives up a lot, and especially the last 10 or 12 games here, they've really sprung a leak there, and you just wonder if the roster has enough to get through it and truly challenge for a playoff spot.
We're going to have to keep an eye out for the Pittsburgh Penguins, and if they continue to have performances like what they did against Toronto, I think we're going to see some Penguins on your next trade board.
Well, the trade board comes out on Wednesday.
Mm.
Little tease. It's not, we're recording this on Monday morning, so it's not 100% finalized, but obviously I've put a lot of work in. And I believe as of right now, there's one Penguin on there.
Okay.
But there's lots of room for more. I mean, look at the fun part about the trade board. I'll say this is when you get into January and February and get much closer to the deadline, like some teams we might not have expected to be sellers become sellers. And then all of a sudden that brings into play a whole new group of players or a fresh batch of players. So I think Pittsburgh could be one. I think Seattle's a team I'm watching. You know, they lost 8 in a row here recently, and they got a number of pending UFAs on their team, I mean, including Jordan Eberle, Alex Wenberg, a few others, Justin Schultz. So, you know, I think that well, the trade season is just kind of heating up a little bit, not quite getting to full boil. I think that there could be some interesting names that come into play once we get into the new year here.
Hold your thoughts on trades, because I did have more trade questions on the other side of sports interaction. We'll get to that on the CJ Show. Welcome to You Can Bet That. Remember to hit up sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all of your gaming needs. Right now on the Sports Interaction website, the Colorado Avalanche are the betting favorite to win the Stanley Cup. 8.5 to 1 odds to win, the best odds of any NHL team. The Rangers, the Golden Knights right after them, the Boston Bruins and the Toronto Maple Leafs, both at 12 to 1 odds to win the Stanley Cup this year. What say you, CJ?
Well, I didn't know Drew was setting the odds for these things. I mean, what's going on here?
Oof. Jeez. That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, the Avs, look, the Avs are a really good team. They're still in that cup window. I get it. At least there's a little bit more respect for Vegas this time around.
Absolutely. And I love Drew, like, keeps us informed in the group chat about every little positive thing that's happening in Colorado. So
yes, he does.
He's a real Avs loyalist, like just yelling into the wind in a very otherwise heavy Leafs focused Steve Dangle, Adam Wild type of group chat. But, you know, the Avs look kind of an intriguing team. I think last year coming off the Stanley Cup, didn't get a chance to be their best. You know, they had a lot of injured players and the like. They still are playing without Gabriel Landeskog, of course. You know, Cale Makar has been in and out of the lineup a little bit this season, but I mean, not too many apparent holes there. And I think, you know, a lot of reason to think management's going to go all in. I would be setting my favorite as Vegas. It's just hard for me to find any flaws there and having just not skipped a beat really from their march through the playoffs last season. To me, the Golden Knights are still setting the standard in the league, but certainly, you know, I'd have Colorado, right. I was trying to think Florida probably be in my top tier of teams. But
interesting.
You know, I think they got it mostly right here. It's just Drew's skewing the odds. That's what's confusing me.
Panthers odds 19 to 1. Teams with better odds than Florida to win the Stanley Cup include, I mentioned Toronto already and Boston, but Carolina, Dallas, Edmonton has better odds at winning the Stanley Cup, 14 to 1, compared to Florida at 19. So it's really fascinating.
And we should mention Edmonton just because their awful start was awful, but there's a lot of good things under the hood that have been happening since they pulled out of that. And while they still have a long way to go, if they get in the playoffs, nobody I don't think is going to want to play them, except producer Drew, who says he thinks the Avs might sweep them in round 1. So take that for what it's worth.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. You can find the full list of Stanley Cup odds on the Sports Interaction website. Don't forget to check out sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all the best odds before game, in game, and the best props. sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. CJ, we are not too far off from the NHL trade freeze, which kicks in at 11:59 p.m. on Tuesday night. You mentioned something off air where in every market, the trade freeze kicks in at 11:59 p.m. local time. So it's not a situation where it's 11:59 Eastern, and then that means in Calgary it's 9:59. Like, why is it set that way?
I think it's just a fairness thing. I mean, you've got 11 games on the schedule Tuesday night, and it's not actually just a trade freeze; it's a roster freeze. Basically, you can. There are some exceptions, but basically you can't really make any roster moves just for all intents and purposes. And so some teams might want to play a game Tuesday night and then make a roster move or two afterwards. And so it probably wouldn't be fair if it was 11:59 in Toronto time, but in Vancouver, that meant it was 8:59 and the Canucks were in the middle of the game and they couldn't make a roster move after their game. And so I think it's just about having, an equal playing field across the league, and it runs all the way through to December 28th. And so, I mean, obviously this is part of the CBA negotiated, I think, for, there's a lot of players. We probably don't always sort of consciously think of this, that are kind of on the cusp at all times of being moved, of being sent to the minors, that don't have a lot of comfort with their spot. And when you couple in that it's a period where, families are trying to get together. Obviously we have a 3-day window in the schedule where there's no games, the 24th, 25th, and 26th. If you were operating right now with it hanging over your head, you might be traded tomorrow in this window. I think it'd be difficult. So yeah, late Tuesday night through December 28th, we will see very little to no player movement. And, I guess the question is, do we see anything that happens before now? Because a deadline sometimes forces action too.
Took the words out of my mouth. That was literally what I was going to ask you next.
I'm doing both jobs today. I love it.
Jesus.
Well, there's been a fair bit in the air, right? We've seen some, I'd call them minor trades in the last week or so. We had Antti Ranta pass through waivers over the weekend as Carolina is juggling some things in net. I'm not aware of any, bubbling move that has to be made right now, but it does feel a little bit like that someone's taken the Coke bottle here and shaken things up a bit. Like you can sense like a little bit of frothiness to things going on. I mean, some of it really just comes from, I think, a number of teams have underperformed their own expectations. Forget even the fan or media expectations. I mean, if you look at the standings right now about who's in and who's out of the playoffs, I mean, there's some teams that I think most people in their preseason picks would have said for sure in the playoffs. And on one hand, you're like, there's a long way to go. On the other hand, you're looking at the standings and a lot of teams have played 30 or more games already. And so you're getting towards the halfway point in the season. And so, for all the reasons that the trades don't happen, mainly down to the fact that teams don't have a lot of cap room and it's tough to maneuver. I do think that there's certainly been a lot of conversations going on, and, maybe this deadline we will see a move or two, because I think there's already been a few surprises, even back to last week, right? A player like Jacob Vrana going through waivers in St. Louis. Carolina's now sent Ranta down to the American Hockey League team in Chicago. I could see a bit of movement, but certainly, as we get into the new year, I think that's really when we should brace for a little bit more action on the trade front.
Already with Carolina, they it looks like they have Aaron Dell on a PTO. Do I have that right?
You do, yeah. Their second PTO, if you remember, Yaroslav Halak was in earlier in the year, didn't end up signing an NHL contract with them. I mean, it's been a very strange season in goal. Ranta's been he's certainly been a very effective goaltender when healthy throughout his career. He's been a mainstay in Carolina, but it speaks to the decline in his play that he would be, first of all, placed on waivers, that he would go unclaimed, and is now finds himself back in the AHL. You've had Frederick Anderson, who's been out with blood clot issues. He's actually recently been cleared here to resume skating, but I think it's going to take a month or more for him to ramp up his return to play before we're talking about him playing games. So really, it's Petr Kochetkov's net as far as we can see. They've also made a recall from an ECHL affiliate. Remember, Carolina is playing this year without an AHL team, so Their prospects are spread all over the place, including the goaltender they had playing in ECHL, Norfolk, who's now up as their backup. I'm sure he'll get some play here, but there's a chance for Aaron Dell, who's had a long career, been a backup a number of times around the league, to perhaps earn a contract, because I think it speaks to where the Hurricanes are at. I know that they've looked at the trade market as well and just not found anything that meets the sort of price they want to pay for what they might be able to get back. And so they're trying desperately to patch it together in goal there. I think that they're very high on Kochetkov, and he may be able to carry the mail as their number one for the time being. But certainly a time of great flux in the Carolina crease, as it is around the league. I don't remember goaltending ever being this kind of, what's the best adjective? Like, it's a bit weird, right? I mean, we've got multiple teams carrying 3 goalies. You have other teams like Carolina. It's just like they're calling guys up from the ECHL. They're bringing Aaron Dell in on a PTO mid-season. Just a lot of strange goaltending, sequences around the league. And then at the same time, you have Ranta, who's been pretty established. I know he's had a terrible year judging by the numbers. But, no one even takes a flyer on him on waivers. I mean, just it's hard to sort of make sense of everything going on in the creases around the league right now.
Yeah, just a really finicky time, again, ahead of that roster freeze on Tuesday.
I'll put another one on your
go ahead.
radar. I mean, the Leafs
Sure.
are using their number 3 goalie right now, Martin Jones, kind of
Yes.
seems to have supplanted Ilya Samsonov. I mean, Joseph Woll, who has a high ankle sprain, he's a fair ways off returning, but when he returns, what do the Leafs do? Do they risk losing Jones on waivers? Is there a world where they consider waiving Samsonov? I mean, the Leafs are a team that probably won't have the cap room to carry 3 goalies, although who knows, because they've kind of been injured all year and they just keep piling more and more injuries on. Mark Giordano's just gone on LTIR here recently. And so, they're going to have a decision to make at that point in time. Again, one that's still a ways off, but it just feels like so many teams, and especially teams that want to have, that are trying to win a Stanley Cup, that are really have high aspirations for the season. There's a lot of situations where it feels like everything is unsettled in their crease.
Okay. What about some free agent talk? Zach Parise and Phil Kessel, 2 names that come to mind. What's the latest with those 2 guys?
Well, we'll start with Parise. I mean, there's actually a very high degree of interest in him. The reason he's not playing right now was his end, not because teams didn't want him at the start of the year, but he had a 21 goal season last year on Long Island, still a very effective player, even at, getting towards his late 30s now. And, he just wasn't sure if he was up to the grind of another season. What's happened in the last few months is I think the itch has returned a little bit. He's really ramped up his conditioning and skating and everything back home in Minnesota. And I think where it's interesting here is that he spent the last two seasons on Long Island, had success. Lou Lamoriello made it clear both privately and in public with reporters that the door was open to Parise. Remember, Lamoriello drafted Parise once upon a time in New Jersey, and they had a long run together there. And so there's, obviously a long-standing relationship. But I think what's happened is, not just the Islanders, there's some teams well above the Islanders in the standings that have come and shown some interest in Parise. And so, it's too soon to say where that's going to fall. But, the only reason he'd be coming back at this point in his life is to chase a Stanley Cup. He hasn't been part of a team that's played beyond the second round of the playoff or first round of the playoffs into the second round. Since he went to the Cup final with the Devils all the way back in 2012. And so he's coming back, not for money, not to add to his stats, but to try to win a cup. And so is he stay loyal to the Islanders, who've done some winning of late, to their credit? I mean, they were in a hole and they've actually strung together a really nice December here. Or does he maybe opt to sign with one of the contenders? I think that's a big to be continued, but I think that it'll be interesting to see what happens with that situation. As it pertains to Phil Kessel, I mean, he's still chomping at the bit to play. Like he is not picky about where he lands. I think that he would sign just about anywhere. Really, really just wants to get back and play in the NHL. And, there have been teams that have kept tabs on him. And at least one point in time where he really thought he was about to sign a contract and the team said it had to make some other moves and, just hasn't ever fallen into place. And now it's at the point where he's looking at going to Europe to at least play some games here on the other side of Christmas if he doesn't get an NHL deal. And so, it says to me that Phil Kessel's probably going to find his way back to the NHL. Like if he's willing to go to that length, sometimes a player with his resume, he is the NHL's reigning Iron Man and he's, the longest serving Iron Man in the league, obviously didn't, jumped right into the NHL when he was drafted. The fact he's willing to go and look at Europe and consider other options, he's trying to do what he can to get a contract. And so we'll monitor his time over in Europe should he end up signing in Switzerland, which is, his rumored destination.
Yeah. We'll definitely keep an eye out for both Zach Parise and Phil Kessel. Before we get to Ask CJ, I'm very curious about your thoughts on the Ottawa Senators. That's a team right now with an 11-15-0 record. They've lost 4 in a row. Ian Mendez, it feels like every time I see him right now, he's writing something about the Ottawa Senators and how weird their season has been. And it feels as if the fan base is impatient with all the losing, but management is just getting its feet wet, right? You have the new ownership and Steve Staios there. I'm just curious about your thoughts on the situation.
Well, I mean, you couldn't have really scripted a worse start to the year for them. Kind of on and off the ice. I mean, off the ice, I think it's great that they have Michael Landauer and they've got stable ownership, but a lot of things have not gone their way. They had this really wonky schedule. I mean, they've only played 26 games where, a lot of the teams they're competing against have played many more. They've barely played on the road. And so it's going to be a tough slog from here on in. And they haven't taken advantage of the fact that they've, played fewer games than everyone else and should therefore be more rested, that they've played so much at home. And I think that adds to everything because they are miles out of the playoffs. They've had a tough start here. They're going on the road. Well, when they come home, and if they come home on a losing skid and they're, you can just imagine what the environment's going to be like at Canadian Tire Center. I mean, we've already had and heard fans, calling for DJ Smith's firing during games in Ottawa. I can't imagine that's going to be abated if this road trip keeps going the way it's going. I mean, it's really been a difficult road trip for them. And so, I don't know where the dam breaks here. I was part of a small group of reporters that spoke with Michael Andlauer, the Senators owner, in Seattle earlier in the month at the Board of Governors meeting. It was very apparent he wanted to give this more time. You almost, as you've laid it out in the question, Julian, he just wants everyone to like calm down and he wants to see more and take more time to evaluate, but this might not end up being entirely on his own timeline, right? I mean, it's a difficult spot to put anyone in. I've seen a few of these over the years where it almost feels like the fans force a firing. One that comes to mind many years ago in Toronto was Ron Wilson. There was sort of fire Wilson chants and signs and the whole and Brian Burke, who was the Leafs GM at the time, came out and he's like, literally, I just couldn't send him out there for another game after that. And I'm not predicting it'll get to that point in Ottawa, but that has happened over time. And, it's tough. I mean, this was supposed to be a year, as was last year, I think, in the minds of Senators ownership and management at the time, where they were meant to take a step forward. And it really hasn't happened. And, look, it sometimes change can be a good thing too. We've seen a lot of where there's been coaching changes around the league. There's been a lot of positive play afterwards, whether you look at Edmonton or Minnesota, they had a real bounce back there. And so, perhaps that will be the case in Ottawa, but we know that management and ownership doesn't want to make that change, but you just wonder how long they can stay patient with the losses mounting and obviously the frustration mounting in that marketplace.
Yeah. It's just a really interesting team. I mean, just every time I see the Ottawa Senators now post Eugene Melnyk and there's some kind of disaster class going on, I just keep thinking to myself, wasn't this not supposed to be the case? Or weren't those days supposed to be over? I don't know. Just really weird.
They
team.
were supposed to be over. They might still end though. Like what Michael Andlauer and Steve Staios want to do is establish stability. And perhaps one way to do that is by rebuilding the foundation. I don't mean the whole team, but like it's been a very tumultuous period in Ottawa Senators history. Like the last 10 years of the Sens, I mean, they have that miracle run, and it was almost a miracle run to Game 7 double overtime of the Eastern Conference Final. They were one goal away from the Cup Final in 2017 and haven't made the playoffs since, right? But on the flip side, and they made some controversial trades in that time, but they've ended up with some good players out of those deals, and getting a Sanderson and then Stützle and even Brady Tkachuk. I mean, down the line, like you feel like they should be moving in a better direction than they are, and it could still come here, but it's going to be tough.
It is going to be tough. We are going to get to Ask CJ, and I should mention, coming up in a couple days, we will have an all Ask CJ show, where it's going to be nothing but questions. That's going to be really fun. But in the meantime,
I hope you mix in some goofy ones there. That's my favorite. I don't know why. We talk hockey the whole show, so I just love sometimes we get to the end and there's just like weird stuff. I mean, some of our most fun moments have come out of like my answer to a question and you don't like it. And we spend 2 episodes debating about chocolate bars or whatever. Like, so I think sometimes I like getting weird sometimes. That's all I'm saying.
The way you described it now, it sounds like you like picking fights more than being weird.
No, but it's I guess what I mean is it's not that I like picking fights, but it like exposes something that you and I would never, like we would never have had that conversation on our own. We wouldn't be like, hey, what chocolate bar do you like? What chocolate bar do you like? But like, so I'm almost certain that the initial spark for that conversation was out of an Ask CJ question. And it just spilled into like, well, now it was like last season for one. So I'm talking about it a year later.
Yeah.
And all the 100%ers out of there know what I'm talking about though. Just on a small reference. Anyway, I'm just saying.
No, you're absolutely right. We'll do our best to make some goofy ones in the Ask CJ episode to come. In the meantime, we can get to questions. We have one here off of Discord from BBaron20. Hi, CJ and Julian, longtime listener, first time caller. I was curious if either of you had food or drink recommendations for Nashville, as I will be there for a night on the 20th. Love the show and thanks for all you do.
Martin's Barbecue.
I didn't get to go during the draft to Martin's Barbecue.
Sound the alarm. I know there's lots of
barbecue
barbecue there, but I love Martin's Barbecue. Like, if I go to Nashville, even when I was traveling around a lot and going there frequently, even if I got there and I didn't have a chance to go the night before, I would go like for my game day lunch. Like, I would cover the game day skate, walk over to Martin's Barbecue, and then have a food coma nap, and then go to the game. So I can't recommend that place enough. Great for barbecue, just kind of unique vibe in there. If you go upstairs, there's kind of like a bar area and outdoor games and stuff. Like, it's just a really cool place. So that's high on my list. And then, I mean, you can't, if you want drinking recommendations, like if you can't find a bar in Nashville, you're doing it wrong. So
yeah, seriously,
it's not going to be hard. Not going to be hard to have fun in a bar if that's what you're looking for while you're there.
Exactly. From a Dill Pickle on Discord, what do yours and CJ's Spotify Wrapped look like?
I got a lot of Taylor Swift on there, man. It was a big year for listening to T Swift.
She has some like album coming out, does she? 1989, Taylor's version. Do I have that? Do I have that right? That's what's coming out.
I'm not an expert. All I know is
you're more of an expert than me. You're more of an expert than me on Taylor Swift. That is your domain. That is not me.
All I don't hate,
and that's not me hating on Taylor Swift. That's not me hating on Taylor Swift. That's just not what I listen to. Just want that out there before the Swifties hear this.
I was pretty fired up yesterday when I was watching the Kansas City New England game, and at one point, did you see when Travis Kelce got kind of like knocked down in the end zone, and she like got up and was definitely swearing, and like she was like every sports fan who's frustrated when something happens to his or her team, and it was just I was loving that. She's like literally. It started off as like kind of like a curiosity. It's like, oh my God, Taylor Swift at a sporting event. And now she's just like literally a massive Chiefs fan, which is awesome.
She's one of us. The way that she got up, it was her and Alana Haim from the band Haim next to her. They're both getting up. And they're like, what is going on? They're one of us now. They're not just people, just celebrities looking for FaceTime on screen at a big game. They're one of us. They're sports fans.
Did you see too
they know what it's like.
She had a birthday cake in the box there. It was her 34th birthday this week. And then her dad like walked it over to the next box over and was like sharing the cake.
That's really nice of them. Happy birthday, Taylor Swift.
Anyway, so that's a lot of my Wrapped. You know, I think the Nationals on there. I saw like the Tragically Hip somehow, even all these years later, like made like my top 5 or something, like around 5th. Cause I still like, it's a summer thing, like sitting on the back deck. And it's still sunny out at like 9:30 at night. Have a cold drink, little hip. Yeah. Like it feels right. So
Drake ended up on my Spotify Wrapped a lot, and I'm a bit confused as to why, but also not. I'm not sure.
Are you taking issue? Like, do you think that you got a bad vote there, or like that their algorithm's off or something?
So like, I know Drake had some projects out in the last few months, and I did listen to Drake stuff, but I don't know, like he'll have stuff with good features on them, and I like listening to that, but I guess Spotify just assumed, okay, all these songs have Drake in them, so you must love Drake. So Drake ended up number 1, but like I like so many other artists this year, like Lil Yachty, Paramore. I'm trying to think of some other ones off the top of my head. Yeah, I don't know. I have a playlist with like some of my favorite songs I like from this year, so I can probably go through that.
Do you know who made my list too? I don't know. Do you know Noah Kahan?
I've heard of Noah Kahan. They're playing Osheaga next summer in Montreal.
Yeah, that was my favorite new artist that I learned of this year, like that I didn't know of in 2022, and listened to a lot of Noah Kahan enough to make my top 5. So,
Kate
no one.
I was
gonna say no one is taking music advice from me though. So, but I would say give Noah Kahan a little listen if you haven't before.
I'll give him a try. Kate Tremine, the collab project with Kate Trinata and Amine, I really liked. Burna Boy had a really good album. Victoria Monet, who got nominated for a bunch of Grammys this year, I really liked. Baby Keem and Kendrick Lamar had a really good song together, The Hillbillies. Dave and Central C, they had a really good collab this year too. That's stuff I liked this year. I'm sure some of it ended up on my Spotify Wrapped. Maybe some of it didn't. Oh well, it doesn't matter. Yeah. Thanks for the question, A Dill Pickle. And one more for you from Jason Isler.
I love dill pickles, by the way.
You like dill pickles?
Love them.
Okay, that's strong. I don't have any objection to pickles.
Okay, I just was throwing it out there in case you hated pickles, and then we were going to fight about pickles.
I don't hate pickles. Well, I have a question though. Like, are you a person that has like pickles on like burgers, or like just where do you normally enjoy dill pickles?
Yeah, I would put it on a burger for sure, or I'm happy if it comes on when I order. I sometimes just like have a dill pickle on the side of like a plate, like at lunch or something.
Oh, okay. That's
it's almost just like, yeah. I'm not like eating it right out of the jar these days.
Yeah, you're not like Snooki from what's the name of that damn show she was on again? Jersey Shore. Remember that show?
Yeah, I never saw it, but I'm aware that there was a show called Jersey Shore.
There was a show called Jersey Shore, and Snooki, one of the characters, was a big fan of pickles.
But yeah, I like a good dill pickle, man. You can't go wrong. Dill pickle on the side of a grilled cheese or something.
I don't like grilled cheeses. I'm not a big cheese person.
Okay. I'm not going to hammer you over that, but I love grilled cheese.
You tried to pick a fight there. You tried.
No, I was doing the opposite. I was like de-escalating a potential situation.
That's true. That's true. I'll give you that. Jason Isler on Twitter. Are the Flames looking to make a move soon to clear out bodies? Injuries are slowing them from pulling the trigger. Guys like Oliver Shillington, Jeremy Poirier, Jacob Pelletier, and Kevin Rooney would seem to force a move when they get healthy early next year. I can help you out with this one.
Take it, bud.
I mean, I really think when Jacob Pelletier's healthy, with the way their roster's set at forward, someone's going to have to move, right? I mean, I know we mentioned Kevin Rooney in there. I'd be surprised if he gets in on that. But I'm really curious about the composition of that roster. And you have some of the guys who have been underperforming among their forwards, and what you're going to try to do there, like a Dylan Dubé, for example. I know his year has not been that great. Adam Ruzicka, they're trying to find some consistency in his game. I know Andrew Mangiapane as well. Like, it's just not been there for him too. A bit up and down in terms of veterans and younger players.
Wait, are you leaving Elias Lindholm out of this?
It's a bit of a different story with him because he's a pending UFA.
It's a different story, but like teams are calling still right now.
Absolutely. So, I'm not putting him in that same group where it's like you're not moving out. I mean, what do you think they'll move out Elias Lindholm like around the time Pelletier's ready, or like around the All-Star break, you think? Like, that's not what I'm thinking of. I would think for Lindholm, they hold on to him by the deadline.
I think it's dependent on how badly someone wants him. I don't know that has to be a deadline move, but like, look, there's not a lot of him. I can tell you from doing the trade board exercise, there's not a lot of, if you miss out on him, the next best forward likely to move, there's again, likely to move is a pretty significant drop off.
Well, I'll say with this with Lindholm, I mean, there's an opening for a 2C in Colorado right now.
Boston,
I know in the past we've linked Boston to Lindholm before. I'm just wondering about the assets. But then again, I mean, you could apply that to anybody, and it's not as if, I mean, Lindholm, remember we were talking about his contract in preseason, and if he was going to be a $9 million player, he doesn't look like a $9 million player. So I wonder how that affects that asking price too.
And honestly, if he's willing, if he ends up being willing to sign an extension as part of a deal, I think it brings into play not just the top tier contenders. It brings into play other teams that want to solidify their center position moving forward. And so, put that one under your hat. I don't know that it doesn't necessarily have to be one of the obvious teams that would love to plug a pretty big hole at the moment. I could see it being, him signing an extension, and it's a longer term play. It's not just about what's remaining on this season.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a really interesting turn for that question.
Dun, dun, dun.
It's a good way to
foreshadow.
That's a good way to end today's show, to be quite honest with you. There's every reason to stick around for the entirety of these CJ shows. You never know what gems are thrown about throughout the duration of the episode. We'll be back on Thursday with more great content and stick taps. And we'll even talk about CJ's trade board that is scheduled to drop on the Athletic website on Wednesday. Subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and subscribe to CJ's Twitter. I know you're not on Threads yet, but go on his Twitter, Reporter Chris, for more great content.
Do you want to know a secret?
Sure.
I've done almost no Christmas shopping.
I mean, you have a week.
I know, but I'm starting to get nervous. Like, I'm starting to feel the tension this morning.
I'm like 90% done my shopping.
Yeah. Well, pray for me this week, bud. It's because I still have to work and everything, right? Like I've left myself a logjam entirely of my own doing, but it's still a busy week with a couple insider tradings. Obviously, we got the pods, my normal work at the Athletic. I got some games to go to, and then I've also still got to get the Christmas shopping done in there somewhere.
And you're a man who loves to do in-person shopping.
Only
good luck.
Exclusively.
Good luck. That's all I have to say to you. Good luck.
Do I know the truth? I've never bought a present off of anything online, like Amazon or anything like that.
Like you've never ordered like we're the exact opposite. I have not gone in person shopping for Christmas in at least 5 years.
All right.
All of my gifts are just like Amazon. I find it online.
Well, if you think of some good presents, you could just send them off of Amazon to my apartment. That'd be appreciated.
Send me your address. I'll send you something. I have a Christmas.
I don't mean for me. Send things that I can gift to people in my life.
No, you know what? I have a Christmas gift for you. Send me your address. I will send it to you.
All right. Love you, buddy.
Love you too. For CJ, I'm Julian. So long and peace.
The Chris Johnston Show.
Powered by Sports Interaction, your homegrown sportsbook. Always remember to bet local.
Inside the game twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @Reporter Chris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JK and McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.